Okay, and away we go. Libraries, archives, authors' homes, and famous bookstores. So we're going to start with Washington, D.C., at the Library of Congress. The most famous and most beautiful room at the Library of Congress is definitely in the Jefferson Building. And weirdly enough, they have Stradivarius violins in their collection, which would be worth millions and millions of dollars. And they also have the very famous photograph by Dorothea Lange of Migrant Mother, because she was being paid by the federal government when she made the photograph. Then you have the National Archives, which is on the mall, and you can see a copy of the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Magna Carta. And they also do some really great online exhibitions as of late. All right, the Morgan Library is the former home of J.P. Morgan, who was probably one of the biggest billionaires in American history. One thing that you could see there are his collection of miniature books. Okay, the New York Public Library's reading room a couple years ago was nearly shut down, and there was a real big outcry in New York City. So they saved it. I've never been to the Newberry Library in Chicago. I will next time I go there. And it's known for its incredible collection of maps. The Huntington Library has also an art collection and a botanical garden in Pasadena, California. And I've been, and I love the art collection. That's where Gainsborough's The Blue Boy is located. And the library has, much like other Gilded Age billionaire libraries, a number of Bibles and rare books. Okay, Trinity College Library. This is where the most famous book in the world is located, and that, of course, is the Book of Kells, which was actually not written in Ireland. It was actually written off the coast of Scotland on an island. And the reading room is the Long Reading Room, and it's pretty spectacular. Okay, I've actually been to Oxford on a field trip with students when I was teaching over in England for 5 weeks. And this is the Bodleian Library. The architecture is really fascinating. And there is, I always remember this, there's a stuffed dodo bird somewhere in the library. Okay, now we're going to London, to the National Archives, which I'd imagine is vast considering the long history of England. And then the British Library is actually fairly new. One of their exhibitions lately was on women in the Middle Ages. Okay, this is my library in my hometown, the Nigel Sprouse Memorial Library, and I used it all the time when I was growing up. I loved going in there, especially for Hardy Boys books. There's some anniversary for Jane Austen happening, or it was something about her birth. Can't remember exactly what it is, but she lived here the last 8 years of her life, and people always flock to England to celebrate Jane Austen, as they should. Charles Dickens. Wow. So how many theaters put on their Christmas Carol productions during Christmas time? I'm wondering across the United States how many there would be. So the Charles Dickens Museum has got to be pretty popular. I mean, he is a giant among novelists. My favorite book is David Copperfield. Did you know that George Orwell wrote 1984 on an isolated island off the coast of Scotland? And at one point, because of weather, you could not actually go to the island. And so that's kind of interesting. 1984, I would say, is probably usually in the top 5 of books sold every year. So it's still quite popular. So there was a thought that the early American authors like Hawthorne and James Fenimore Cooper were not as accomplished as authors of the same time period in Europe. Culture in America was seen as sort of a backwater, but I don't agree with that. Well, obviously, I mean, most people now today wouldn't agree with that. But yeah, I think Nathaniel Hawthorne's house would be a good one to go to. Emily Dickin's house is in Amherst. Hold on a second. Amherst, Massachusetts. Yep. And she was isolated at times, which is kind of an interesting thing to think about. And one of the most beloved authors for sure. Even in this time period, people still go back to her works. Okay, I talked about Edith Wharton in another lecture. She was a member of the very high society of New York City, who would summer in Lenox, Massachusetts. And she wrote The Age of Innocence, The House of Mirth, and it was all set in this very upper crust world. If you ask somebody who's the most famous author from Nebraska, my home state, they would hands down say Willa Cather, author of My Antonia and O Pioneers, and just a giant in American letters. And she was a lesbian, which I don't know if it was necessarily hidden, but a very fascinating figure in the history of American literature. Okay, let's do bookshops. So the most famous bookshop in Europe would undoubtedly be Shakespeare and Company in Paris. And it was originally owned by American expats, but I don't necessarily know if that's true today. Well, I don't know who owns it today. Let's just say that. And then Gay's the Word in London. So here's a little quote. I had a young woman, this happens all the time, who suddenly choked up as she was buying books and apologized. I said, no need to apologize. This is your space, your home. I think it's a lovely quote. Prairie Lights Bookstore is famous because the Iowa Writers Workshop is the best writing graduate program in the United States. And when you go in there, they have books from their alumni. Hungry Mind. I worked there for 2 years, 1997 to 1999. And it was a really at the forefront of the independent bookstore movement. And unfortunately, it doesn't exist today. Majors and Quinn, I would say, is the most important bookstore in Minneapolis. It's cavernous. It's got lots and lots of books, and you should check it out. This is Burke Barch Books, owned by Louise Erdrich, the most famous Native writer today. And as you might imagine, if you go in, there's all kinds of resources and books about Native culture. Okay, Boswell Book Company is in Milwaukee. I love their shelves. I love their tables with curated books for you to see. Okay, so there was a big movement during COVID to purchase books from black-owned bookstores, and this is one of them. This is in Detroit, the Source Booksellers, and it's Janet Webster Jones who is the one of the owners. Powell's is like a castle to books. It is absolutely just so large. It's in Portland, Oregon, and it's a pretty important one, I think, as far as when people think about bookstores in the United States. Tattered Cover is in Denver, and it has a really cool staircase, and they actually display books on shelves kind of next to the big staircase. City Lights was definitely the center for the beat poetry movement, and it's not a large one. Actually, I've been to it, but one that people should see for sure. The Strand, much like Powell's, is incredibly large. You should maybe take a string and untwine it as you're going through all the various different rooms so you can get back to where you started. It's a treasure of New York City for sure. Politics and Prose in Washington, D.C. It was my favorite D.C. bookstore. So the name says it all, Politics and Prose. They have a great author reading program. All right, there's been kind of an interesting trend as of late. Famous authors are starting to open up bookstores, and this is Ann Patchett's Parnassus Bookstore in Nashville, Tennessee. Okay, Books Are Magic is a store owned by Emma Straub, and it's in Brooklyn, New York. This is my favorite bookstore. This is Next Chapter. It's connected to the McAllister store, and it's on Snelling, and they know me by name. Okay, so one of my goals is to make directional bookstores in the USA the furthest ones. So I've already been to Kauai, which is the most western Hawaiian bookstore, and this bookstore is called Talk Story Books, and there's a little cat who's really sweet. The most northern one would be in Maine. I have not been. The next three I've not been to. This is John Smith's Books. And then depending upon how you're measuring it, I guess in the lower 48, it would be Northern Lights Bookstore, Thief River Falls. And then in the south, it would be on the island of St. Croix, Undercover Books and Gifts. Okay, so on my bucket list is all of the next stores. This is Rizzoli in New York City. Rizzoli is the premier, one of the premier art book publishers. So that would be really fun to go in there. And then at the same time I'm in New York City, I would want to go to the Drama Bookshop. And then this is William Stout's Architectural Bookstore, so that's all that's in the store is just those books, which would be very expensive, that's for sure. And then for me, the most beautiful bookstore possibly in the United States is Baldwin's Book Barn in Westchester, Pennsylvania. The barn was built in 1882, and it became a bookstore in the 1930s. Okay, now we're going to Europe. In London, you've got Daunt Books. The books are organized by country. Then you've got Word on the Water, London. So apparently they have a problem with reverse shoplifting. People tend to smuggle books onto the shelves, which is, I think, fascinating. And then you have, I think, I'm not alone, the most beautiful bookstore of all time, which I think is the one in the Netherlands. It was in a former cathedral. And then this is just called Stories, Hamburg, Germany. And then Bucherlagen in Berlin, which is underneath a railroad track. And then Livrana Varen in Lisbon. And then last but not least, let's look at some children's bookstores. So here's Red Balloon Bookshop. It also has a few adult titles, but it's primarily known, obviously, as a children's bookstore on Grand Avenue. And then this is the Wild Rumpus. I would imagine some of you have been there before, which is in Minneapolis. And then this is the Rainbow Booksellers for Children in Milwaukee. And last but not least, another bookstore owned by African Americans in University City, Missouri. And I would definitely go there if I ever traveled to Missouri. Okay, we did it. Thanks, everybody.